My name is Fiona Caldwell, and I am 75 years old. I have lived long enough to see the world change from black and white televisions to glowing screens that fit in the palm of a hand. I have buried parents, friends, and my husband, Daniel, who left me with nothing but memories and debt. I raised one child, Tyler, through storms of bills, late-night hospital visits, and the kind of silence only single mothers know. I'm not perfect, but I'm steady. My hands are lined, my back stiff, but my heart, though bruised, still beats with a stubborn rhythm. On Thanksgiving night, in my son's shining suburban home, everything I had carried for a lifetime cracked open. It was supposed to be a meal, nothing more. But the words, "You're not even his real mother in spirit," cut through the clinking of forks like a blade. They came from Rosie, my daughter-in-law, standing at the head of the table as if she were the queen and I a servant trespassing in her court. For a second I thought I had misheard her, but the silence that followed told me I hadn't. No one defended me, not my son, not even the little granddaughter who once climbed into my lap for stories. Every face turned away as though I was invisible. Rosie lifted the gift I had laid gently on the table, a table runner sewn from Daniel's old shirt, 3 weeks of work stitched into every line, and with a smile sharp as glass, she dropped it to the floor. Then, slowly, she pressed her heel into it. "This!" she spat. "This is trash." The laughter was soft, nervous, but it spread like a ripple. My ears rang, my jaw locked so tight I thought my teeth might splinter. I bent down, lifted the fabric from the floor, and smoothed it with trembling hands. I could smell Daniel's cologne still faint in the cloth, and that was when I felt it. That quiet, burning pivot from silence to something else. What they did not know was that I had come prepared. In my purse, folded in cream-coloured paper, was an envelope I had carried for years. My insurance, my last resort. 4 words written inside that could change everything. And as the room filled again with laughter that no longer included me, I slid my hand into my purse, curled my fingers around that envelope and thought, it's time. I wasn't always the quiet woman in the corner chair. Once, I was 19. My whole life lay ahead, though I didn't know what kind of life it would be. It was winter, bitter and grey, when I found myself on the tile floor of a hospital, knees curled to my chest, blood soaking through the gown. My voice was raw from saying the same words again and again. I did not ask for this, but no one listened. Not the nurses who hurried past with their clipboards, not the doctor who refused to meet my eyes, not even my mother, who stood stiff as a stranger against the wall. To her, I was already ruined. To them, I was just another girl with a story they didn't want to hear. I left that hospital with a body broken and a spirit split in two. But in my arms, I held the only reason I had to keep walking forward. My son, Tyler. He was small, red-faced, lungs loud enough to drown out the silence of the world that had turned its back on me. Raising him was not easy. We lived in a trailer with a leaky roof. I worked 2 jobs, day shifts at a diner, night shifts sewing patches for neighbours' jeans. Some mornings I left him sleeping in a borrowed crib, praying the sitter showed up on time. Some nights I came home so tired I wept into a pillow while he lay beside me, clutching my finger with his tiny fist. But he was my reason, my heartbeat outside my chest. And when the world tried to tell me I was weak, I looked at him and thought, if I break, he breaks, and I will not let that happen. Still, the whispers followed me. She made her bed. She trapped some boy. She'll never make it. Every PTA meeting, every church potluck, every neighbour who smirked when my old car broke down. I carried those whispers like stones in my pockets, heavy but hidden. And then one night, when Tyler was barely 6 months old, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the bills I couldn't pay. My hands shook as I thought about the hospital, about the man whose name I never said out loud, about the secret I had buried so deep I prayed no one would ever dig it up. That was the first night I promised myself. I will build a life so strong, no one can ever take it from us. And I began, quietly, with scraps, sewing, saving pennies, working shifts no one wanted. What no one knew, not even Tyler, was that the life I built wasn't just made of flour, fabric, and long hours. It was built on one truth I never shared. A truth that, if spoken aloud, could shatter the son I had given everything for. By the time Tyler was in high school, I had built something small but steady. It wasn't much, just a bakery on the corner of Maple Street with a cracked sign and a bell over the door that jingled when customers walked in. I named it Irene's Oven, after my mother. Not because she ever loved me, but because I wanted to prove something. That I could turn pain into sweetness. That even wounds could rise if given enough heat. The bakery saved me. The smell of cinnamon and yeast greeted me every dawn. I worked 12-hour days, flour clinging to my hair, sugar crusting on my apron. I stitched pies the way other women stitched quilts, with patience and prayer. Tyler studied at the counter some nights, math books open while I rolled dough. Sometimes he'd drift off with his head against a sack of flour, and I'd cover him with a towel, smiling even though my body ached. It was in that bakery that I first met Rosie. She was 19 then, the same age I had been when my world cracked. She walked in late to the interview, eyeliner smudged, perfume too sharp, smile too quick. She couldn't name a sourdough from a baguette, but she said she loved people and worked hard. Something in me softened. I saw the hunger in her eyes, the way her fingers tapped the counter like she couldn't bear stillness. I told myself she deserved a chance. Didn't I once need one too? So I hired her. At first she was fine. Customers liked her quick laugh. She upsold cinnamon rolls better than I ever could. She moved with a kind of confidence that made people buy more, tip more, stay longer. But then the tills started coming up short. $10 here, $20 there, enough for me to notice. I checked the math, checked my other employees. I didn't want to believe it. But one night, I stayed late in the back kitchen, lights low, and I saw it with my own eyes. Rosie slipped 2 20s into her apron, smooth as if she'd done it before. I stepped out, flour still on my hands. "Rosie." She froze. We sat at the tiny break table. I made tea, though my hands were shaking. "I could call the police," I told her. "I could end your record before it even starts." She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just whispered, "You wouldn't." "Try me," I said. After a long silence, she muttered, "I needed it. For groceries. My mum's boyfriend left. We're behind on rent." Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. I didn't ask. Instead, I slid the tea toward her and said, "Leave. Don't come back. And if I ever hear of you stealing again, I'll make sure your name follows you like smoke." She walked out that night. I thought I'd never see her again. But fate has a cruel sense of humour. 3 years later, Tyler brought her home. The first time Rosie crossed my threshold as Tyler's girlfriend, I nearly dropped the pie plate in my hands. It was 3 years since the night she stole from my bakery. 3 years since I told her to never come back. But there she was, standing in my living room in a cream sweater, hair smooth, makeup flawless, smile just as sharp as the day she lied to my face. "Mom," Tyler said proudly, "this is Rosie." For a heartbeat, the air went out of the room. My hands itched with memory, flour and betrayal ghosting across my skin. But Tyler's eyes, bright, hopeful, were fixed on me, waiting for approval. I forced a smile. "Welcome, Rosie." She leaned in, kissed my cheek like we were old friends. Her perfume was different now, softer, expensive. "It's so lovely to finally meet you," she purred, as though she hadn't once stuffed stolen bills into her apron pocket. The evening played out like a stage play. Tyler beamed, talking about classes, about the business ideas he was sketching in notebooks. Rosie laughed in all the right places, touched his arm at every pause, looked at him like he was the only man in the world. I watched her the way you watch a match fall into dry grass, silent, but bracing for fire. When she went to the kitchen to fetch water, Tyler leaned closer to me. "Isn't she amazing, Mum? Strong, independent, real?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and say, "She is not what you think, she is not who you believe." But what could I say? That she was a thief, that I had caught her red-handed. He would never believe me. Love blinds faster than lies. So I swallowed it. I smiled. I let the evening pass. But in the quiet of my bedroom that night, I wept. Not because Rosie had returned, but because I knew Tyler was already hers. He laughed differently now, softer when she spoke, louder when she looked at him. He leaned toward her without thinking, like a flower bending toward sunlight. And I, the woman who had built his life brick by brick, was already becoming a shadow. The next year blurred. The proposal came quickly. Rosie moved in faster. Suddenly she was cooking Thanksgiving meals, redecorating the living room, hanging curtains I hadn't chosen. My photographs began disappearing from the walls, replaced with curated prints she found more modern. "Call before visiting, Mum," Tyler said once, shifting awkwardly. "Rosie just likes her space, her rules, her house, all built on my sacrifices." And that was when I knew I would have to protect him, even if it meant protecting him from her. The decline didn't happen in one day. It was a slow bleed, a missing photo here, a misplaced word there, until I barely recognized the home I once visited freely. At first, Rosie's insults came wrapped in sugar. "Oh, Fiona, I love that you still use those old sewing machines. So authentic. Your pies are great, but Tyler and I are watching carbs now. Must be nice not having to worry about real work stress anymore." Always with a smile. Always loud enough for the room to hear. "And Tyler?" He laughed. Every time. It wasn't cruel, not in the obvious sense. It was something sharper, something more dangerous. Death by 1,000 little cuts. I became the afterthought. The ghost at the dinner table. Where once my pies had been the centerpiece, now they sat on sideboards, in case anyone wanted a taste. Where once I had rocked my granddaughter to sleep, now Rosie's mother swooped in, the real grandmother, who, according to Rosie, understood modern parenting. I was asked to call before visiting, then I was asked to text instead of call. Then I was told it was better to come on weekends when things are less busy. Slowly, my visits went from weekly to monthly. The chair at their table, the one near the fire where I once sat, was pushed further down. Until one Thanksgiving, I found myself wedged at the far end between a toddler with sticky hands and Rosie's aunt, who couldn't even remember my name. I ate in silence. I smiled when spoken to. I folded napkins neatly on my lap, while laughter bubbled at the other end of the table. Laughter I wasn't part of anymore. But the worst part wasn't Rosie. It was Tyler. Every time Rosie's barbs landed, every time the spotlight dimmed me to a shadow, he said nothing. Not once did he lift his voice in my defense. He sat there, my son, the boy I raised through storms and sickness, silent. And in that silence, something inside me began to harden. Because I realized what Rosie wanted wasn't just Tyler's love. She wanted my absence. She wanted to erase me, stitch me out of the family quilt like a thread that didn't belong. But what she didn't know was that I am not a thread. I am the cloth. And I had already sewn a safety net she couldn't see. Tyler was always a dreamer. When he told me about his software idea, a program to help small businesses track their inventory, I saw the fire in his eyes. He poured his savings into it, quit his steady job, and swore he would make it work. But dreams don't pay bills. Within a year, the money was gone. The investors had pulled out. He was weeks from losing the house, the car, everything. I found out through a neighbour, not from him. That stung. But I drove over anyway, knocked on his door and asked, point blank, "Tyler, what do you need?" He couldn't meet my eyes. His voice cracked. "I can't ask you to bail me out, Mum." "You're not asking," I said. "I'm offering." I didn't hug him. I didn't whisper, "It'll be okay." I had said those things before and they had been thrown back at me. Instead, I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and made a call. See, Daniel, God rest him, left me nothing but debt when he died. But I had rebuilt brick by brick, little investments, long-term bonds, savings accounts no one knew about. I never touched them, never bragged, just tucked them away like a squirrel hiding acorns. By the time Tyler's business collapsed, I had enough. Enough to give him a second chance. But not blindly, not with Rosie in the picture. So I funneled the money through a trust. I put Tyler's name on the operation, but I kept control. And I added one clause, written in black ink by a lawyer who didn't ask questions. If Tyler ever married Rosie, all controlling shares would revert back to me. It wasn't revenge, it was protection. Because I had seen Rosie's kind before, hungry, charming, dangerous. I wasn't about to let her sink her claws into everything I had built. Tyler signed without question. Maybe he thought I would never enforce it. Maybe he thought love would be enough to change her. 8 months later, he married Rosie anyway. And from that day forward, I carried a cream-coloured envelope in my purse. Inside, the proof, my quiet promise, my clause, waiting. At first, Rosie acted like the company's biggest cheerleader. She posted glowing photos on social media. Tyler at his desk, their daughter playing with toy laptops, glossy captions about family dreams coming true. She bragged at dinner parties, clinked her wine glass and said, "We built this from scratch." But as the profits grew, so did her questions. Who's handling our accounts, Tyler? Do we have the right financial advisor? Shouldn't we have clarity about our long-term security? On the surface, it sounded innocent, smart even, but I heard the undertone. What she really meant was, I want to know what belongs to me. She poked at accountants. She suggested new lawyers. She asked Tyler for paperwork he couldn't find. She smiled at me too sweetly at family dinners, her eyes sharp, searching for cracks. And every time, I stayed silent. Let her dig, I thought. Some traps don't need bait, they just need patience. I watched as they bought a new house. My money. I watched as they renovated the kitchen. My money. I watched as they sent their daughter to private school. My money. And every time Rosie raised a glass to toast their hard work, I sat in the corner, invisible, and thought, you have no idea how fragile your kingdom is. One evening, at a crowded party in their home, I caught Rosie whispering to a friend in the hallway. The woman asked, "How's Tyler's mum doing?" Rosie's smile sharpened. "She means well. She's just old school. Thinks sewing gifts is the same as being present." I bit down so hard I tasted copper. Because I had been present. Every scraped knee, every dentist appointment, every midnight panic attack. I had stitched his life together when no one else would. But Rosie didn't want a mother-in-law. She wanted an obstacle removed. And as she smirked in that hallway, whispering behind her glass of wine, I knew one thing. The day was coming when she would strike, and when she did, I would be ready. There are memories I have folded so tightly, I almost convinced myself they weren't real. But every time I looked at Tyler, every time he laughed or furrowed his brow, I saw him, the man whose name I never spoke. I was 19 when it happened. Too young, too naive, too alone. It wasn't love. It wasn't even a choice. It was a night stolen from me. A night I tried to tell the world about, but the world turned its back. The hospital, the cold tile floor, my mother's silence, their disbelief. And then there was Tyler, tiny, fragile, screaming as if he understood even then how unfair it was to be born from pain. I told him stories growing up. I told him his father had been a high school sweetheart, a boy who died in a car accident before he knew Tyler even existed. It was a lie I sewed into his childhood like a patch over a hole too ugly to show. Because how do you tell your son he was born of violence? How do you let him carry that weight when he's just learning to walk? So I carried it instead. Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every parent-teacher meeting, I carried the truth like a stone in my chest, smiling while it crushed me from the inside. And then years later, when Tyler laughed with Rosie, when he looked at her like she was the sun, I thought, maybe it worked. Maybe the lie saved him. Maybe he could build a life free from the ghost that haunted me. But secrets have a way of clawing their way to the surface. And Rosie, she could smell weakness. One night, after too many glasses of wine, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Tell me, Fiona, why don't you ever talk about Tyler's father? Funny, isn't it? For someone who claims to be so proud, you never share a single photo, a single story. Don't you think that's odd?" Her eyes glittered. She didn't know the truth, not yet. But she suspected there was something, and suspicion was enough for a woman like her. I gripped the counter to steady myself. "Some stories aren't yours to hear." She tilted her head, smiling like a cat with a cornered mouse. "Oh, but they will be, one way or another." And in that moment I felt it, like a clock beginning to count down. Rosie would not rest until she uncovered the ghost I had buried, and when she did, she would use it like a knife. It happened at a Sunday dinner, one of those forced gatherings where everyone pretends to be happy for the sake of appearances. Rosie had set the table in that way she loved. White linens, gold-rimmed plates, wine glasses tall as towers. I brought a pie, as I always did, though I noticed it was placed at the very end of the sideboard, almost hidden behind the salad. We ate, we talked, we laughed. Well, they laughed. I mostly listened. And then, out of nowhere, Rosie's voice cut through the room like glass. "Tyler, isn't it strange that your mum never talks about your father?" The clink of silverware stopped. Tyler frowned mid-bite. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just that every family has stories. But Fiona's never shared much about yours. Not a single picture, not a single memory. Isn't that odd? Don't you think it's hiding something?" The table went still. Even the children hushed, sensing the tension. My pulse hammered in my ears. I forced my hands to stay steady on my napkin. That's because some stories are private. But Rosie wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with false innocence. Private or shameful? The word hung in the air, thick as smoke. Tyler's face hardened. He looked at me, not her, searching, waiting. And in that moment, I saw it, the crack she had been chiseling for years. She had planted her seed of doubt, and Tyler, my son, was listening. I don't owe you an explanation. Rosie leaned back, victorious, swirling her wine. Of course not, Fiona. But secrets have a way of coming out, don't they? The conversation limped on after that, shallow and forced. But the wound had been made. Rosie hadn't just embarrassed me. She had opened a door, left it swinging wide for Tyler to walk through. That night, alone in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel until my fingers ached. Rosie thought she had won. She thought she could cut me out with one sharp remark. But what she didn't know was this. I had been preparing for her strike from the very beginning, and when the moment came, I would not hesitate. After that dinner, things shifted. Not all at once, but in ways so small and deliberate I almost admired her craft. Rosie didn't need to shout to push me out. She just closed doors one at a time. First came the birthdays. We're keeping it small this year, Fiona. Just a few friends. Except when the photos appeared online, the table was crowded with faces I didn't know, laughter spilling through the screen. Tyler blowing out candles, Rosie's parents beaming at his side, their granddaughter perched on Rosie's mother's lap. My chair was empty, my absence unspoken. Then came the holidays. Thanksgiving will be easier if we host just immediate family. And when I reminded her that I was immediate family, her smile never wavered. Oh, Fiona, you know what I mean. Finally, even my granddaughter's school play. I arrived early, clutching flowers, heart racing with excitement. But when I slipped into a seat, Rosie's hand clamped my arm. Actually, Fiona, that one's saved. For our family. Our family. 2 words, a razor's edge. Tyler was there, standing only a few feet away, but he said nothing. He looked at the floor, shuffled his program, let his wife's hand guide the moment. And I gathered my flowers, my pride, and moved to the back row. From there, I watched my granddaughter stumble through her lines, her bright little voice carrying across the auditorium. She never saw me. She never knew I was there. And for the first time in years, I cried openly, with no one to hide it from. Rosie was winning. She had carved me out of birthdays, holidays, even the smallest joys. She was building a world where I was a ghost, a shadow that could be forgotten with enough time. But ghosts don't stay buried forever. She had her claws, but so did I. And mine were sharpened by decades of silence, sacrifice, and pain. The envelope in my purse grew heavier by the day, the trust clause whispering to me in every quiet moment. Not yet, I told myself, not yet. Wait until she's sure she's untouchable. Then strike. Because if Rosie thought she had erased me, she was about to learn that I am not a footnote in this story. I am the author. Thanksgiving used to be mine. Every year I woke before dawn, rolled out pies, roasted turkeys, laid out linens that smelled of starch and lavender. Family gathered in my kitchen, voices rising with the steam from simmering pots. But now Thanksgiving belonged to Rosie. She hosted with the precision of a general, matching plates, tall centerpieces, wine that cost more than my first month's rent. Guests arrived in waves, most of them her friends, her family. I was one of the few from Tyler's side, a relic seated at the far end of a table that didn't feel like home. I brought a pie, of course, apple, Tyler's favourite. I set it carefully on the counter. No one touched it. Dinner unfolded like theatre. Rosie presided at the head, dazzling, laughing too loudly. Tyler followed her lead, carving the turkey, pouring the wine. I tried to settle into the background, but Rosie wasn't satisfied with my silence anymore. Halfway through the meal, she lifted her glass. I think we should all take a moment to be thankful for family, especially for the truth that holds us together. And then she said it. It's strange, isn't it, how some people build their lives on lies? Like not telling your son who his real father is. The table froze. Laughter died. Forks clattered against porcelain. Tyler's face drained of colour. He looked at me, not her, not the others, me. Mum? My throat closed. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The secret I had carried for decades lay exposed in front of strangers, shredded from my hands like a flag torn from a pole. Rosie smiled sweetly, as though she hadn't just gutted me alive. I just think honesty is important in families, don't you? Tyler pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. Is it true? I opened my mouth, but no sound came. The room tilted, heat rushing to my face. All I could see was his eyes, wide, hurt, betrayed. Yes, it's true. A gasp rippled across the table. My granddaughter dropped her fork. Rosie's smile widened, victorious, her hand sliding possessively over Tyler's arm. But she didn't notice the other thing, the envelope sitting heavy in my purse, pressing against my ribs like a heartbeat. Let her think she had won. Let her gloat. Let her sharpen her knives. Because tonight she had overplayed her hand, and very soon I would play mine. The table did not move. It felt like a painting. Forks suspended, mouths open, laughter cut off mid-breath. I had lived 72 years, but I'd never felt more naked than in that moment. Tyler's chair screeched back. He stood, face pale, fists trembling at his sides. You should have told me, Tyler. It's not your fault, darling. None of this is. You deserved honesty and she couldn't give it to you. But you have me now. We have each other. Her words landed like chains, around his wrists, around his throat. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some pretended to sip wine. Some looked away. No one defended me. Not one. I sat there with my pie cooling untouched on the counter, with the table runner hidden in its box by the door, with my son looking at me like I had turned into a stranger. Please. It wasn't a lie, it was survival. But he was already walking away. He disappeared into the kitchen, the sound of a slammed door echoing through the house I had paid for. Rosie turned to me then, her smile sharp as a blade. You don't belong here, Fiona. Not in his house, not in his life. You're just baggage, and baggage gets left behind. Her perfume stung my nose, expensive and suffocating. I stared at the linen cloth, at the flickering candles, at the faces too polite to intervene. I had never felt so small. Later, when the plates were cleared and the laughter forced itself back into the room, I gathered my coat. My pie still sat untouched, condensation fogging the glass lid. I left it there. Outside, the night was cold. The air bit at my cheeks. I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, unable to turn the key. My chest ached, not from age, but from heartbreak. For the first time in decades, I allowed myself to cry. Not the quiet tears of a woman who hides her pain, but the guttural sobs of a mother abandoned in plain sight. And when the sobs finally emptied me, I pressed my hand against my purse, felt the outline of the envelope. Activate the clause. It was time. The lawyer's office smelled of dust and ink. I remember it well, sunlight slanting through the blinds, catching the gold trim on the frames that held degrees I could never have dreamed of earning. His name was Walter Briggs, old school man, suspenders, hair white as snow, eyes sharp behind half-moon glasses. He had handled the paperwork for neighbours, wills for church friends, the deeds of half the town. And he knew me, not as a client, but as a widow who had clawed her way back from debt without ever asking for pity. Fiona, he said gently that day, are you certain you want to do this? It isn't the usual arrangement. I slid the papers across the desk. I'm certain, because by then I had already seen what Rosie was capable of. The sharp smile, the hunger behind her eyes, the way she circled Tyler like a hawk circles prey. Walter studied me. You could just leave the money to Tyler in your will. No, I said. Wills can be twisted. I need something stronger, something that protects him even from himself. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. You want a trust? Yes, one with teeth. So we wrote it. Every clause, every condition. Tyler could run the business, draw the profits, live his life with dignity, but the control, the real foundation, stayed under my name. And if he married Rosie, it would all revert back to me. Not out of spite, not out of malice, out of survival. Because I'd seen too many women like Rosie, ambitious, relentless, willing to burn down a family to claim a throne. Walter tapped the final page. It'll hold. She'll never see it coming. I signed my name with a steady hand. Fiona Caldwell. Each stroke of ink felt like a prayer stitched into fabric, like armour laid quietly around my son. When I left his office, the late autumn air was crisp, The sky streaked pink with evening light. I clutched the cream-coloured envelope he gave me, folded it in half and slipped it into my purse. It was more than paper. It was a promise. For years it slept quietly beside me, at church pews, in grocery lines, at birthdays and graduations. I never spoke of it, never hinted at it. I waited, watching, knowing. And on Thanksgiving night, as Rosie tried to carve my soul open at her table, that envelope burned against my ribs like a living thing. I had carried it long enough. Now it was time to wake it. The Monday after Thanksgiving, the sky was low and grey, heavy with rain that never quite fell. I drove to Walter's office with the envelope tucked under my arm. My hands didn't tremble, not this time. Walter looked up from his desk, his eyebrows rising when he saw me. "Fiona," he said softly. "So it's time. It's past time." I set the envelope down. "Activate the clause." He nodded, no questions asked. He slid the envelope across the desk, opened the flap, and unfolded the contract we had written years ago. The ink had faded some, but the words still cut clean. All controlling shares of Caldwell Enterprises revert to Fiona Caldwell in the event that Tyler Caldwell legally marries Rosalind Turner. Walter picked up the phone. His voice was calm, professional, as he contacted the registrar of trusts, the accountant, the board members. Each word he spoke was a stone dropped in still water, ripples spreading out further and further. By noon, the trust had been activated. By 2, the accounts were frozen. By dusk, the house Rosie loved to parade was no longer theirs. I didn't tell them myself. I didn't need to. The letter would arrive the next morning, thick with legal weight, each word stripping away the empire they thought they had built. That evening, I sat alone in my small kitchen, eating soup from a chipped bowl, the silence broken only by the tick of the clock. I thought of Tyler, my son, my boy who once cried when his goldfish died, who clung to me during thunderstorms, who believed me when no one else did. I thought of him sitting at that Thanksgiving table, silent as Rosie carved me open. I did not smile. I did not gloat. Revenge had no taste, no sweetness. What I felt instead was release. For the first time in years, the weight slid from my shoulders. Rosie had taken so much, my dignity, my place in my son's life, but she had not taken everything. She never would. By morning, their world would collapse like wet paper. And when the dust settled, Rosie would learn the truth that women like me have always known. You can strip us bare. You can trample our names. You can cast us aside. But underestimate us, that's the last mistake you'll ever make.
The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Rosie tore it open first, expecting perhaps a notice, a bill, an invitation. Instead, her face drained of colour as her eyes darted across the words. Her hand began to shake, though she tried to hide it. Tyler read it next. His lips moved silently, tracing each line, until the paper slipped from his fingers and floated to the floor. Everything, shares, accounts, property, had been stripped clean in a single stroke. The trust had closed around them like a trap. Rosie screamed.
"She planned this. She's been waiting like a snake."
But Tyler just sat on the edge of the sofa, head in his hands. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. That afternoon, he came to my house, alone. I was at the kitchen table, stitching the hem of a curtain. The radio hummed softly in the background. When I looked up, he was standing in the doorway, the boy and the man tangled together in his face. "Why?" he asked. Just one word, cracked down the middle. I set the needle aside. "Because I had to protect what you couldn't see. Rosie was never building a life with you, Tyler. She was building it on you." He flinched, but he didn't argue. His silence was heavier than any protest. "I didn't want to take everything from you," I continued, my voice steady. "I wanted to save you, but you let her strip me piece by piece until this was all I had left." He swallowed hard, tears threatening. "You should have told me the truth, Mum. About Dad. About all of it." My throat closed. I couldn't. Back then, I couldn't. You were a child, and the truth was uglier than you deserved. For a moment, we just sat in the quiet, the distance between us filled with decades of unsaid words. Then finally, he stood.
"I don't know if I can forgive you," he said. "Not yet."
"I don't ask for that," I whispered. "I only ask that you remember who stood by you when everything else fell away." He left without another word, the screen door slamming behind him. I sat there a long time, listening to the empty house settle around me. And then I picked up the needle again, because that's what women like me do. We stitch what's torn, we mend what we can, and when it's beyond repair, we create something new from the scraps. Rosie had her empire for a season, but I had my sovereignty, and when the last chapter closed, it was my hands that held the pen.